have what I think is going to be a really interesting discussion. Tara, do you want to come and join us in one of the hot seats? Travis Lovett is just walking in right on time. That is uncanny. This is a man who's walked 905 kilometres from Melbourne to Parliament House, and now he's walked in the door right on time. How good is that? Welcome, Trav. Do you want to come up and join us? Awesome. Now, I think this is a really interesting topic of which there are no necessarily right answers, but it's one that we really need to talk about. So the Accord has lots of goals in terms of getting greater representation of Indigenous students, of low SES students, of regional students, and students with a disability. But we don't have the same goals and perhaps we don't express the same aspirations for staff. So we've got an opportunity for a really interesting discussion here. We're going to start with a quick video. It's about 12 minutes. It's an interview with Paul Harpur, who is one of the world's leading academics on relating to law and disability. We pre-recorded it because there were some issues with beaming it in. So we'll play that and then we'll go into the conversation. Professor Paul Harpur has joined us from the University of Queensland's Law Faculty. He's had an extraordinary career as a Paralympian, academic expert and speaker. He served on the University's Accord Ministerial Reference Group to represent disability. He directs the Disability Collaboratory, a UQ-wide research platform with 400 collaborators. Paul, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here today.
Now, I gather that from your work, it's around between 1% and 6% of university staff say that they have a disability in Australia. Can you tell us a bit more about those figures? Why don't we actually know?
Well, it's a really good question. And part of the problem is staff choose to disclose or choose not to. And for staff, there's a lot of risk if you disclose. So a lot of people don't disclose, whereas I'm totally blind and I have a guide dog. When I walk into the room, people guess by the fact I've got a guide dog and my eyes are shut that I'm blind. But if you have other disability like chronic fatigues disability or neurological, even a lower leg amputation, you may choose not to disclose for various reasons. So we don't know for sure, but we do know student numbers are a lot more accurate. And I was serving on the Higher Education Standards Panel under the TEXA Act, and we released a paper, and in that we've got the figure at 12.35% of the student population. The student population has a disability, which is, considering our student population of around 1.6 million higher education, that's around, getting, and with that factor in staff, you're getting near 200,000 people with disabilities working in higher ed. And that number is going up and up because the students in high school, you have a massive percent on individual plans. COVID really was a spike there. And so the numbers of students with disabilities that are going to enter our university in the next few years is going up.
So with numbers on the up at the secondary level, should we expect a significant increase in the number of students with disability over the next 20 years?
I would say not 20 years, probably 5. This increase is happening as we speak.
So if we have only 1% to 6% of university staff with a disability, but it's up to 20% in the population, why is it that we have that significant gap there? Why is there such an underrepresentation?
There's a real challenge if you're going from being a higher degree researcher into research and through your academic ranks, because at each step of the way, universities broadly haven't adopted universal design, still have barriers to inclusion. But you can look also at the quilt data, the student survey, and that shows you this what the students are saying. More than 1 in 10 of our students are saying that the environment they work in, the attitudes, everything, they're less satisfied than students without a disability. And that's really relevant for me as a staff member. When I walk across campus or I go into a library or I use a data system, in most cases, it's the same platforms as students. Sometimes it's a different interface, but in a lot of cases, it's the same.
You did an amazing TED talk in 2021 and talked about the challenges and opportunities and realities of life with a disability as an academic. How much has changed since 2021?
A lot, and a lot of regulatory changes, and a lot more people coming forward with a disability. Universities can really drive change in society. If you think about it, we train the disability leaders of tomorrow, all those students with disabilities. We employ disability leaders of today, and we produce research and innovation which truly changes the world. Universities are a machine for social good, and we do change society. And evidence of that change is also in how we regulate our sector. So since I gave that TED, I spoke in my TED about universities working to champion inclusion. And there has been a lot more effort on at local universities. So at the UQ, for example, the Disability Collaboratory didn't exist in when I gave my TED, and it's been formed, and we've got 400 collaborators. We're forming research projects around disability, not because it's just the right thing. I mean, obviously, we're all enthused to do the right thing, but because this is where an area of growth, an area where we can really change society in health, engineering, IT, law, business, and the impact on society, I think, is really profound, and that all comes from universities. One of the changes I think that everyone is interested in university leadership is around the Disability Support Fund guidelines. That the Minister of for our Minister Claire released these. Was it what is we in June? So yeah, last week, and by July, that's when they commence. These guidelines link university funding to disability governance. So, in other words, similar to the Indigenous framework where universities receive money from the government, but in return, that's linked to Indigenous governance. Now we have a framework where disability governance is mandated if the universities want to take, I think it's like somewhere between, depends on the uni, but sort of $500,000 to $1 million sort of dollars. So it's a lot of money. And these guidelines have a number of quite significant changes in them. There's a requirement that universities have a disability committee. That committee has to be majority of people with disabilities on it. So we're going back to who has a disability. Well, for that committee, you're going to have staff with disabilities on it. There has to be students with disabilities on it. And significantly, there's a requirement that the committee has either a vice chancellor, deputy vice chancellor, pro vice chancellor, or other senior executive on it. They actually require that this disability committee has oversight over how the university uses its funds for disability, which is a big step up. And then also there has to be an academic strategy and a workforce strategy, disability inclusion, sorry, a disability inclusion academic strategy and a disability inclusion workforce strategy have to be developed with people with disabilities. And a significant part is there's resources have to be devoted to this. So you can't just ask people to do it for nothing. You've got to be resourced, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's tied to a funding increase, which came out in December 2024, where the sector had a 400% increase in funding. So it is a lot to ask of universities, but I don't know about you, but if someone offered me a 400% pay rise, I'd probably be very amenable to a bit of extra work.
I'm assuming that there is a big range of responses so far. Some universities will be well ahead. Obviously, at UQ, you've been leading some change there. Others will have a fair way to go. Where would be the best place to start for the universities that haven't done that work and realize they need to in a hurry?
For me, the easiest place for any university is stop worrying about the regulations and start worrying about your people. Turn around and go, who is actually doing something similar? So a lot of universities already have employee resource groups, and there's also disability student groups at most universities. So they've already got those two going, and all universities have disability managers. So the first thing I would be doing is working out, asking these people, uh, what do we got? What do we need? All universities have some form of disability action plan or collection of strategies.
I get a number of calls from people with disabilities working in the sector who feel like they don't want to disclose because people might see them as expensive and try to get that. Also, there's a concern that, oh, well, I've put in a ramp, so that's my disability inclusion done without looking at the diversity of disability need. How do we sort of get that right in terms of broadening an idea of what disability is even?
Well, I totally agree. Just because you've got a plan doesn't mean it's implemented and doesn't mean there's people to implement it. And a good example of that is the student access plans. They're drafted by someone, this is every university, they draft it centrally, then they land in the school and the professors have to implement them. And so you've got a lot of actors all with different timelines and different requirements and resourcing. So yeah, the plans aren't always implemented, and I think the easiest way, well, not the easy one effective way is making sure that there is a better governance structure internally to work out what's going on and where are the pain points.
I think we should be looking at new targets specifically for representation in the workforce. So the population's 20%. We're at 1 to 6%. We know the student population is growing. Have you got thoughts on targets?
Yeah, whether it's a hard target, but I think it needs to be measured and really, really looked at seriously. And if you look at the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that has in there an obligation on states to collect data, and which they also say is disaggregated, which is not just you have a disability full stop, but what sort of disability, the severity, are you what intersection? So is it Indigenous, or you have if your gender, rural, regional, those sort of things. So we don't just say, well, we've now got a good employment of people with disabilities because we have, I don't know, a lot of people who have a disability type, but then those with a more profound disability, for example, there's absolutely no one. And I give
Yeah.
that example not because I'm bagging anyone, but I mean the Paralympic movement, for example, in Australia we had a really good representation in the high end disability, so the more able, and but a problem in the lower end, and that's where Professor Sean Tweedy here started Power Start to really help us Australia get more representation in those higher end profound disabilities and got those people's lives going better, but also increase our medal chances which is quite important because Brisbane 2032 is just around the corner.
And I think that leads into the last question that I really wanted to focus on, Paul. You've touched on it before. Obviously, there's universities want to do the right thing and so on. But when it comes to the crunch, if managers are sitting there thinking that, oh, someone with a disability is going to cost more, and so they have conscious or unconscious bias against employing them, what do you say to them? What do you say in terms of what they're missing?
Well, I think an individual manager, it's hard for that individual supervisor who's got to carry the load. Well, this is where these new systems, like the new workforce strategies, I think really need to come in, provide the wraparound. So if I have someone who's starting, it's not up to the supervisor to figure it out. There'll be a system where which is more universally accessible. Because if we want to get 80% attainment in this sector, we need to make the universally designed university that has its doors open to everyone.
Fantastic. Paul Harpur, thank you very much. That's been incredibly insightful.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I found the conversation with Paul incredibly insightful. I actually wasn't aware of the changes the ministerial direction had introduced just a couple of weeks ago. And so I was very glad he could bring that in. And I think you'll see a lot of resonance, obviously, with other areas. Now, Trav and Tara, I haven't introduced you in a long form manner. Do you want to give us 1 minute each on who you are before we go into your reflections on what Paul had to say?
Hi, I'm Tara Waller. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm currently the Director of Capability and Employee Experience at RMIT University. And I think one of the reasons I've been asked to speak today is based on our idea or inclusion, diversity, equity and access framework and approach. And I have a particular passion for inclusion and diversity in my role, as anyone from RMIT here will probably attest to. I drive them all insane. So I'm really, really honoured to be speaking next to Trav and kind of speaking with Paul at the same time. Thanks for having me.
Yes, no, that's absolutely why we wanted you here, because of your long experience in this area. Trav, welcome to the sector.
Hey, thank you.
I know that's a bit late to say that, but you've had a very diverse career, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. Lata larawa latun lat lin yung Travis Lovett keramara gunijmara meeting linyan kokon kenen konaterek bujabim yumbin meeting oranjari ma meeting cool and meeting. Just a short intro there. Introduce myself in my mother tongue, which is more than 65,000 years old. It's very rarely spoken in these corridors, so it's always important that we share our language, our culture, our traditions, also recognise are on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So just joined the university sector recently, been in government for a long time. Good to see some familiar faces. A long time in government actually, but more recently before the university I was the Deputy Chair and Commissioner of the Youth Justice Commission, Australia's first truth-telling process that investigated the injustices against First Peoples that ultimately led to providing recommendations to go to Australia's first treaty, which is absolutely fantastic, and I think that deserves a round of applause. It's absolutely fantastic. So, but very new to universities, but I guess, similar to other panel members here, I mean, we are all, in the same plight and struggle, and there's a lot of synergies around kind of what's already been said and what will probably already, complement to the conversation today. But it's about leadership, and it's about, we talk about Reconciliation Week and the theme this year being all in. Well, we need to be all in all year round on these types of things, not just because it's diversity or an inclusive. It should just be a common practice that we're talking about this. And in particular when universities are put in really unique situations like we're finding ourselves now, which is, lack of funding or tightening up of funding and so forth. Generally, the first things that are to go are around HR, around First Peoples, around disability, around diversity and inclusion and so forth as well. So this is the time when we need to be leaning in and not always having to overly quantify our value add. Anyway, I do talk a lot, sorry everyone, but it's nice to be here.
Did you have any first impressions from Paul's discussion? Trevor, I know you were nodding along when you heard all those echoes with what's been learned from implementing Indigenous inclusion strategies, if you like, and then transferred into the disability sector now.
Well, I think it's there's so many synergies around lived experience. I think a lot of the time I'm really trying to change this emphasis on stories. Because stories, is, people can be caught up in it's mythological, it's created, rather than lived. A lot of the time, we hear from, in the truth-telling space around people's lived experiences and how do we change, how do we change systems through people's lives and what they've lived through and what they've, been a part of. And that is professional too. It's not just the trauma. It's the thanks to the resistance and the contributions that people make as well. But also, using data and evidence, I think, is incredibly important, and even more pertinent that we're at universities as well. So I think it's elevating the lived experience, but it's also empowering, disability around having people, a certain amount of people with disability actually at the table. Well, I think the majority of them should be at the table, not just a certain percentage. It should be led and driven by, and the project sponsor or the actual Deputy Vice Chancellor or whoever the senior decision maker on really should be sitting there in like a co-chair arrangement, so that can actually be driven. But not also for for people of disability or even First Peoples. I'll talk from First Peoples' point of view that we have to hold everything. We're accountable for the organisation's delivery. There needs to be power and authority that's transferred to these committees, or else it's just another conversation, another yarn, or another report sitting on the shelf as well.
Great. Thanks. Tara, any reflections?
I think what really stood out to me from Paul's conversation was the concept of universal design, and I think it's incredibly important from when we're thinking about staff with disability in particular and how we establish not only our physical environments but the way we work together, the way we communicate, the way we recruit, our different systems. How are we thinking about designing the way we do things so that it's inclusive of all people? And I know the concept of universal design stems from a people with disability background, but I think it's also applicable across all of our inclusion conversations. So when we think about how we're looking at underrepresented staff, when we're looking at how we support our increasingly diverse student base who we need to be accommodating in different ways to how we always have, how can we think about the way we educate? How can we think about our recruitment processes and our systems and our ways of working so that we're creating inclusive and eliminating barriers from the get-go instead of then having to retrofit those or questioning why doing things the way we've always done them aren't working.
Just to follow up on that, though, as you say, you've worked in this space for a long time. People probably know you for working in this space. We've talked a lot about culture today. Why, despite the fact that we say we have a good culture, why do you have to keep fighting that battle? Why do you have to keep winning that argument? Because you have to keep on explaining to people, actually, diversity is important, but it's not an accepted fact in our hiring policies across the sector.
I think from my perspective, I actually think it is a relatively accepted fact. What I think is that for so many people, it's an accepted fact that they don't think is their job. That they think there's a team who will do that, and so they don't necessarily have to think about it. Or when I'm feeling very generous, it's because they actually just don't know how to start. So and this is why I talk a lot about the systems and processes, because if we can make it so that it's intuitive, so that people are actually inclusive because that's the way the system has been designed, and we give them the education and information that they need to do it and it's easy, that's where you get the real wins. So I guess my perspective is, and this is not universal. There are people who absolutely you have to keep having that argument with or fight with, or who will never buy into the reality that inclusion and diversity makes us better as a university and as a community. But I think for the most part, it's around people who, I think about this 24 hours a day. I dream about weird diversity things. That's not true for everyone. And so how for someone who... They know it's true. But for someone who's not doing that, for someone who is trying to develop a program in science, how do we make it so that it's easy and seamless and that actually they're building it inclusively from the get-go? That, I think, is where we get the real difference. And then when people see that that's working, I think it reinforces that behaviour over again.
I think just to complement that, I think we link it to people's performance plans. That's one of the recommendations we put on the Royal Commission. Back to government departmental secretaries, when it's in their performance plans, then they make it, cascaded down. Is it perfect? No, but it's another mechanism to also complement what is done here. Because people want to deliver on their performance plans because it's tied to an increment or an increase in salary, and therefore when you've got those strategic hooks, that's also another way to really reinforce the importance at all levels. It's not the only measure, but it's again to complement what's happening there. And we're starting to see that a little bit more with secretaries actually from departments having them in their, in their performance plans, and we're seeing an increase in, first people's commitments being delivered. But it's nowhere near perfect. I mean, that's why we're still having to be on a panel and talking about it.
Do you mind if I just add to that one quickly? Do. Because accountability matters, right? And so we found out about the new regulations around disability last week as well. And there's part of me that went, oh my God, more regulation, which is taking me away from being able to do the real work that makes the real difference on the ground. And at the same time, when we're not held accountable, there are parts of my job that I won't do if my boss doesn't hold me accountable for it. Let's be real. And that's true for all of us. So I agree with you. I think having it in our performance plans, having it in our key performance indicators as an institution, and then some of the regulation, as much as sometimes I resent it a little bit. Some of that is actually really critical for keeping us where we need to be and focusing on the things that will make a real difference for people.
And having to report, well, this is great, having to report on it, sorry mate, having to report on it publicly. I mean, you've got to develop a sense of humour in these spaces because the work is hard. You know, when you don't get wins all the time, so when you want to celebrate the wins, so you've got to have a sense of humour about yourself, but also public accountability as well. I think that was something that we really found. I know it's very unique, having a commission where you call bureaucrats and ministers to account. But having that stronger accountability and that public reporting where there's actually public scrutiny over what we're actually reporting on as well. Because a lot of the stuff that's publicly scrutinised is not diversity and inclusion. That's actually like an afterthought, unless it's our sector actually saying, well, what have you done about that? You know, why haven't you hit your 3% employment target? And it's not just employment target, it's also about the economic prosperity in our communities, in our societies as well. So procuring not only Aboriginal businesses, but also businesses from, diverse backgrounds and also disability as well, because we've all got something to offer. And I think one other misconception out there that I like to kind of speak about, particularly on First Peoples, is, we get everything. Well, that's just not true. It's absolutely not true, and it's a farce that people think that they have to give something up in order for our communities and the work that we're talking about specifically today, in order for First Peoples to thrive or disability or diversity, so other people lose. It actually strengthens us, and there's data and there's evidence to be able to tell that, to pick up on another point that was raised as well. This is about society. How do we reflect the society that we're actually sitting in this room right now when we look around? How diverse, and that is a strength of ours. In this country called Australia now.
We've all heard you can't beat it if you can't see it, where the Accord is aiming to get an extra 1 million students in, of whom many will be Indigenous people with disabilities, low SES and regional, and yet there's 27% of school students currently identify as having a disability. It's 1 to 6% of staff. There's significant wins in getting Indigenous students into higher ed, but we still struggle with Indigenous. Do we need some harder goals here? Like, how does the Accord even work if you can't actually see the end of that pipeline?
I think there's a few different factors. We've spoken about it. It's about accountability. Everyone's got a 1%, 3% Aboriginal employment strategy. There shouldn't be an Aboriginal person in this country without a job. The fact is that we're not delivering on those commitments, that's first and foremost. But also when you think about institutions like universities, a lot of the time, and people go, he's talking about history again. The current is informed by deep colonial roots. And that's including government, that's our institutions as well. We're still deeply embedded in the way we think about colonisation and how it's still formed. We haven't changed that much. We've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. A lot of institutions have done really wrong by Aboriginal people as well, which is another barrier, where we've been researched, but we've never been a part of the research. We've been researched, but I'm saying this on purpose again. We've been researched, but we've never been a part of it. You think about data sovereignty. Who owns the data? It's always government or the university. So there's a lot of an extractive process happening rather than, again, what's been said today and a bit earlier as well, which was work with us. Empower us as First Peoples, as traditional owners. How do we also collaborate? We're in such competition with each other where every single day when I first came to Melbourne Uni, and I've heard it up until I got an email on Friday last week where we went from number 1 in Australia to number 2, and it's hit their mob pretty hard there. Unbelievable. Because I'm like, no one's saying we're number 1 today? What's going on? And I think for me, it's like, I don't mind the competitiveness, but let's be competitive on things that matter, like delivering on First Peoples commitments, delivering in diversity, delivering on disability and so forth as well. Let's actually be competitive in all facets of how we do that. But how do we collaborate more as universities? There's hardly any collaboration going on. We're all in competition for the numbers, so how do we look to, okay, if we've got a great initiative happening, how do we share that, or how do we do research together better and so forth as well? This sounds like it's really basic stuff, but it doesn't happen. It actually doesn't happen. We're literally, I just got, I didn't pretty much walk here, I walked here, and it was only a K down the road, but literally a K, and yet we can't collaborate. and then at the same time. So also, how do we leverage off what's happening around the world? And we are research institutions, so what are we doing to research what's happening well in other countries that are doing really well?
What he said.
The team effort.
I think the work with us, I think, is absolutely key. I think we've spent a long time, and we see this at RMIT and we're guilty of it. We're like, let's poach people from the other universities, but how do we work with other universities to identify what really works in this country? But how do we work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to understand what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples need, want to kind of contribute and lead in our workforces? Because I don't know how regularly we've actually asked that question, and I certainly don't know how often we've listened. And so one of the things that I know we have in our institution have had to look at a lot is we have amazing recruitment campaigns. We have amazing branding. We advertise in all the right places, and we haven't invested the time in making sure that when a person joins our organisation, they're culturally safe, that they're supported, that they have what they need to be successful, that they're listened to as a person who might be able to help us think about the way we do things differently, who might bring a different perspective of leadership, who might bring a different perspective of research. And I think when we genuinely stop approaching this like we have the answers, and start listening and asking the right questions, I think that's where we'll start to create the shift.
Are you both concerned that as in times when money gets tighter, that this is, as you alluded to before, this is one of the first things that sometimes gets cut or deprioritised?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is why we have to be even louder. We have to be in all year round, which is why I made that point before. We just got to keep pushing the boundaries, and I think that's why that public reporting is really important, because we still need to deliver on that as well. So, but also, I think there's other ways in collaborating with industries and so forth to be able to give back. So one of the things we're exploring at the University of Melbourne at the moment is when people think of redress and reparations, they think, First Peoples just want money back. Well, how do we look to be strategic around, okay, money back is certainly, many people wouldn't know here that a lot of the early money that the University of Melbourne made was on the back of Gunditjmara country, my people's country, of stolen land, stolen wages, and so forth as well. So how do we look to give back in a monetary sense, but also how do we look to give back? We've got 14,000 staff. I only fell over when someone told me that, in the University of Melbourne. 14,000 staff. So how do we look to do reparations or redress in a way that actually we second our staff to help traditional owner groups strengthen? We don't build people's capacity, because if we're building their capacity implies they've got none. No, we're here to strengthen. Picking up on the point here made before, we're here to strengthen the capacity of institutions and organisations like, I guess, traditional owner groups and so forth as well. How do we build those relationships? So how do we be creative as well? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, as I said, 3% employment, everyone's got a target. What's the target for RMIT? 3, 4? 3. So everyone's got one, so there should be jobs, but also at the same time, there's not enough investment as well. We don't invest in universities enough in going out to schools. The RMIT might, but I know Melbourne Uni's got a sense of we don't do that. Well, we should be. We actually should be going into high schools and actually talking to people, say, here's our service offering, but also talking to past students and past staff. We don't do that. And we're in the business of truth-telling, so we will be doing another truth-telling book, and we'll be talking to past students and past staff and actually getting to the crust of what do we do well for some of those students who thrived, but also what did we do horribly wrong to you, or what kind of infrastructure would have helped you be more successful as well. So again, it's that evidence base through lived experience. But I'm certainly worried. Of course we are.
Me too. I think I probably need to call out that there's a Pauline Hanson-shaped elephant in this particular diversity and inclusion room at the moment. And at the moment, some of the people who we've been supporting, working with, employing, hoping to see in future leadership roles are under attack. And so I'm nervous both from a budget is tightening, and this is one of the things that is the first to get cut. I'm also nervous because I feel like the work we do is more critical now than it has been in my history in this career, and in this workforce. And so, it worries me a lot, and it's one of the reasons I talk a lot about the nudges and building things into systems, because there's part of me that's, the more we have it built in and the more we have people thinking about it because it's just part of the work they do, the less they can pull it out of the budget. And so for me, that's critically important. But I also think that the more we can educate people who have come from privilege, about that privilege, and to understand how they can work differently and how they can be more inclusive in the work they do, I think we can mitigate some of that, because some of the budget comes when we're relying on 3 or 4 people in a diversity and inclusion team, and that's a well-resourced diversity and inclusion team, doing the work of 14,000 at Uni Mel. I think we're 10,000, so it can't be a small group of people doing the work. It actually needs to be all of us. And I also am really with you, Trav, on we need to be getting out into schools. I think one of the biggest gaps that we have is that we look to university educated people as our potential workforce, and we're too late, and we're doing things, if the same thinking that we've had today isn't going to get us to where we need to be. And so how do we support students to be thinking about their careers, to be thinking about careers in university, and to be thinking about, for me, RMIT as that place that they want to come and work and be future leaders in.
I think as well, just to complement that, the voice for First Peoples, that's been just an absolute dismal thing to have to live through. Everyone just thinks anything First Peoples now, we told you no. We told you no, why you keep going? We hear it every single day. So just to complement the comment there about, what Pauline Hanson's trying to do, it's this divide notion. I think also when people think of that word privilege, they think of wealth, deep generational wealth. No, there's privileges in life that we have. And even now I always say to my children, and even as an Aboriginal person, being able to do some of the work that I've got, like I've got different privileges now as a First Peoples person. I can't deny that. I get to go into rooms, I get to have these conversations, but also go into rooms that our people have never been into. So there's a privilege in that. But there's also that responsibility that comes with that privilege on, pushing the boundaries, asking the hard questions. But again, the point made as well, embed this in systems. So if there's change in government, there might be a change in Victorian government at the end of this year as well, which is another concern. So it's not just political, but also as well, investing in your leaders in these spaces as well. One of the things that, really trying to encourage at the university is having more Aboriginal leaders, because you can't be what you can't see. And our mob want to go and work where all the deadly blackfellas are working. True, that's it. So if you've got really, and it's not just about attracting them with the money, it's about the environment. It's actually about that holistic approach, cultural safety. 50% of our mob feel culturally unsafe. 50% of First Peoples experience racism in work or at school. 50%. That's half of this room, for instance. And that's really sad. And that's not to make people feel bad. It's just, okay, here's the facts. How do we work together? This is what our ancestors have always called for, which is why we walked to Parliament. Elbows turned on his back on First People since the voice. It's not how we feel. It's just fact. He hasn't come out and made any deep policy commitments. And that was why we thought, no, we're going to walk to him. We're going to call him out, and hopefully he'll come out. Was it perfect? No, it's not. Did he announce a truth-telling process? No, it's not. But we've got a foot in the door now to have further dialogue with him. But that visual of him walking out showed our mob. Wasn't perfect, but there was an element of healing to say, I am still here. There's power in that. It's never perfect. They're politicians, remember? It's government. They're politicians, but at the same time, there's powerful things that we can do, and you're continually doing every day, is continue to show up.
Trav, you've segued beautifully into what was going to be my next question, which is, at a more personal level, I guess. So you walked 905 kilometres for the National Walk for Truth. You are the first and only university staff member that I'm aware of who has had a Prime Minister stop work and come out because of what you're doing, representing universities, and that's an extraordinary achievement, that we can't just gloss over just in a sentence or two. It's quite remarkable, and I think that's got potential lessons for us, across the board. But do we need more unconventional leaders? You're clearly you're new new to the sector, but you're bringing something which we haven't had before.
Yeah, no, I think, I sometimes sit in these rooms and I hear these big words. I'm like, geez, you fellas are smart, Well, you are. Of course you're smart as well, but it's just a different world. I come from government. We throw a lot of acronyms around. We try to sound really smart, but anyway, that's another, I guess, probably going down a rabbit hole there. But look, I think it's you can't be what you can't see. We got to be recruiting different people. Different, I guess, perspectives, different ways of kind of going about the work, bringing people together. That was the power of the walk. It wasn't just about First Peoples walking, it was actually about an invitation. And there was that re-invitation post the voice to go, a lot of people out there, a lot of strong allies. What do I do next? How do I re-engage? People didn't know what to do. So that's why we walked. So, okay, come walk with us. And that standing in solidarity reminds us as First Peoples that people care. People actually want to understand our lived experience, but it's also about how do we move forward together. And I think that's another reason why as well. So when we are recruiting, when we're looking for, I guess, different people, let's always just not always be in that same paradigm around, well, what are we really looking for here? Just another one of us. Because I was pretty transparent with the university when they came and said, do you want to come and work? I'm like, I'm very different to yous, to pick up on the question, but at the same time, this is what I think I can add, bring something different. And I agreed to, and I think owning my space, I agreed to take my talents to the university. And there's a power in that. That's me claiming my self-determination and our self-determination that it's different. And it's not for everybody. I'm sure that people...
I was going to say that, Trev, because sorry to interrupt, because you need to be reasonably strong to be very different in a group.
No, that's exactly right. But also it's stick to the principles as well. Again, for me, it's about how do we work together. But also as well, I think the beauty about what I've tried to really do, particularly in the last few years as well, is focus on the delivery. Let the delivery do the talking. I've been on the commission, we've delivered amazing work. Before this walk, I walked 500 Ks to give the Victorian government or the governor and the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria the report as well. So in total now it's over 1,400 kilometres I've walked as well. No more walks, eh? But at the same time, I think it's also how do we keep our culture alive? Walking and talking and listening together is a core foundation of our culture, walking country with people. So doing what our ancestors have already taught us to do. Again, it's not about naming and blaming, but how do we have conversations and how do we move forward? A lot of the time, again, I said before, and I sort of half spoke about it, which is misconceptions about First Peoples getting everything, in particular free houses. How many times have people broadly, put your hand up, have you heard blackfellas getting something for free? Quite a lot. It's just an absolute myth. In Victoria alone, we are 10 times more likely to be homeless in this state. So if we got everything, one of the first things we would have done was get a house to make sure where people are looked after. It's not the case. And if we're 10 times more likely to be homeless, again, this is not making people feel bad. This is about data and evidence. We can't get bail. So our people can't get bail. You know why they can't get bail? Because they don't have a house to go to. We can't get our kids back because we don't have a house to be able to provide a stable address and so forth as well. Don't get me wrong, First Peoples have done things wrong as well. I'm not here to say that it's all perfect, but what we need to understand is the systems are deeply embedded in their colonial roots, which are, unfortunately, in this country, it's been founded on racism. And that's just the reality. So this is why we push for truth-telling. This is why we call for truth. But also we have solutions in how we move forward. But it needs to be shaped by First People sitting at the table, by diverse communities sitting at the table and actually having that lived experience to be able to articulate how to best go about that.
I think Trav just exemplified why we need different kinds of leadership in the university sector. Because that different way of thinking and that way of challenging the way we've always done things is what's going to make us better. And I know both of you have used the term, if you can't be it if you can't see it. And it's one of the phrases that I know is very common in diversity, and it's also one that I have a real problem with because my job, as I see it, is that I need to make it possible that even if you haven't seen it before, you absolutely believe that you can be it. And so I think, Trav, you're probably a prime example of that. You bring different thinking, you bring different leadership, you bring inspiration. I know there are a couple of us who, we did leg one, we did nothing close to 905 kilometres, but we were with you in spirit. I was with you on the gram. But it is exactly that kind of thing that current university leaders, which all of us in the room should be thinking about. What is that different thinking we need? What is the voice that hasn't been in the room? Who are we not listening to at the moment? And how do we use that knowledge and that leadership and wisdom to make us better at what we do for our students, for our communities and for the world?
Spot on, that's right. And also as well, I think something that's getting left behind is also about the gender equity. You know, there's a lot of misogyny at these universities too, I've noticed. Got to call that out. You know, so not also losing sight of the gender equity issues as well. Not seeing too many women sitting around the leadership table. Yeah.
It's like you've read my notes, Trev. So, Tara, I wanted to talk about gender equity. So we've had this long-term issue with underrepresentation of women, particularly in senior ranks of the sector as a whole. But now also we have this lost boys problem with not enough young men coming in to study in higher education. How do you start to even address that from a policy or a practice point of view?
It's an incredibly challenging question. And so I think we're starting to see some changes with senior women in leadership. What I will say is that, at least from what I've seen, it's fairly homogenous kind of woman who is in a leadership position. In terms of boys going into higher education, it's in terms of how we're attracting people in as students, I don't feel very well qualified to speak to that. But one of the things I would say is that that's one of the critical elements that the Accord will need to address in terms of how are we ensuring that our tertiary education system, so I include both vocational education and universities in that, are giving compelling reasons for people to want to continue learning. And I guess for me it is around that lifelong learning. One of the things I will say is around our workforce. So when we think about gender equity and think about our gender pay gap, we know that one of the reasons for our gender pay gap is that we have really low representation of men in our lower hue level roles. And that some of that, and this is a hypothesis that I think we're trying to prove at the moment, some of that is because of how we value the work that people do in organisations. So what are the historically feminised roles? And so a lot of our lower hue level roles will be those of executive assistants, who anyone who's ever had one knows will change your life. But they're largely held by women, at least in our organisation. We know that men enter the university system as employees at a higher hue level on average than do women. And so part of our question is around, well, what are, as I said, what are those roles that we're valuing? What does great work look like, great leadership work look like? Why are women entering at lower levels, and what do we need to do to kind of even the playing field in that regard? And then similarly at the other end, what are the things that are in a lot of, not all cases, but in many cases, are supporting women to decide to opt out of senior leadership roles, because we know that we have incredibly capable women at all levels throughout the organisation. And we also know that women are a lot more likely, once we get to sort of a hue 9, 10 exec level, to say, oh, hell no, that's not for me. What is it about those roles that make them so exclusionary for women to want to step into them? So I'm not sure that I entirely answered your question, but I did take the opportunity to have a rant that I wanted to, so that's good.
Fantastic. We're very close to time. I'd be really interested just to bring you back to a couple of points of diverse types of leadership. Can you think of one or two things that you would change so that we can have more diverse leaders, not only come in, but actually have them want to stay? What are the, say, two things that we could change? And they could be really simple and free, probably. And I don't want just like, oh, good culture. I sort of want, oh, if only they were not completely rude to me, or, you know, whatever it is. Something specific.
So this one's not small. I actually think we need to do a complete rethink of what good leadership looks like, because I think leadership usually looks like a white man, and I think that negates the will of many people to want to step into that kind of role. So I think really redefining great leadership. We've seen great diverse leadership. We need to celebrate that more and help more people to see what that looks like. And then probably a smaller level, maybe more tangible one is what if our senior leadership roles were actually manageable within a normal human being's life? So what if we actually only got them to work 36.25 hours? Would we get people who are more likely to want to give their best for those 36.25 hours rather than asking them to sacrifice their whole self to the organisation they work for?
Yeah, I don't think I've got much more to add to that. Yeah, I think it's just being open. Academia, a lot of it is about, how many research articles you're pumping out. But it's also, about valuing different things, about relationships. How do you work with other people? How do you collaborate? How do you just be a good human? How about that? Just be a good human.
I love that. And that is a mic drop moment, I think, Trev. No question. Really appreciate your insights, both of yours and Paul's today. It's been a really great session. Thank you.